Well, hi everybody. I wanted to take a moment to do this video on the developmental niche because this is really a key concept that we will use throughout the rest of the semester. So when you think about developmental milestones throughout life or universal events in a lifetime, what do you think of? I mean, these are things that everybody, no matter what culture you're in, experiences. So we're all born. How that looks depends on what our culture is, right? Whether we're born in our home, whether we're born in a hospital, whether it's a midwife, a doctor, just within the family, what happens after the baby's born. But universally, everybody is born. We all learn, whether it's formal or informal education. We all go through puberty. We all go through adulthood and childbearing years. We go through menopause, which is the end of childbearing years if you're a woman. Obviously, men don't go through menopause. And we become an elder or a senior citizen if we live that long. And eventually we die. Can you think of any others that might be universal milestones? Some people have said, things like working careers, but I don't know if those are universal. I think that sometimes those are culture specific. So when we consider a newborn, what is it that a newborn needs the most? How do we show babies love? So these are the common things that people say. They need love, shelter, and food. How do we show baby love? Do we hold the baby? How do we hold the baby? Do we make eye contact? Is it mom's job to hold the baby? Is it dad's job? Is there someone else who is involved as far as caring for the child and showing love? How do we provide shelter? Again, that can look so different depending on where you grow up and where you're raised. And how do we provide food for a baby? So there's a big article, a case recently where there was a police officer in Argentina who breastfed a child who was hungry at the hospital she was working in. And I'm just going to ask you if we consider, like in our culture in the United States, if a police officer breastfed a stranger's child, how do you think that would be received in our country? My guess is that some people would be in an uproar. We're more of a private culture overall. So it's really pretty interesting to me. Do you believe in breastfeeding? Do you believe in formula? What do you believe is the best way? It really depends on your developmental niche. What do you think happened with the Argentinian police officer? I'll give you a second to think about that. I'd love it if you read the article. It's very quick. She got promoted. So she became a sergeant. In her country, that's such a natural thing for a mother to do, whether it's your child or someone else's child, that providing food in that way was very acceptable and appropriate. So when we think about this, the thing that's missing is culture. That's why in Argentina, it looks very different than for breastfeeding, for example, than it does in the United States, in the practice of breastfeeding perhaps a stranger's child compared to just breastfeeding your own. But culture is what provides the scripts and the pathways for development. It helps us determine what's universal, meaning what everybody does across all cultures. So those things that were listed, like we're born, we go through puberty, those are universal, everyone does it. And what's variable across cultures in the world. So all of these influences are interconnected. And this is a graphic from your book. But basically, there's the child, and the child's impacted by settings. So where they grow up, what their home is, what their bedroom looks like, things like that, to the customs of their culture, to the caretaker psychology, like are they a strict parent, authoritative, authoritarian, permissive? So what kind of parenting style is it? Who's parenting also? And then there's outside forces, the larger human ecology that also has an impact. When you think of the ecology, it's the bioecological model, you'll see a lot of overlapping between this idea and Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. So to get back to the developmental niche, there's three main areas. So there's physical and social settings. That's like, where your home is. What does your home look like? Is it an entire family in a one-bedroom apartment, or is it a gigantic house? What kind of gendering practices? Think in terms of your own experience. Were you encouraged to play with girl toys or boy toys? So what did it look like? Were you in trouble if you were doing tomboy type things? That's where a girl climbs trees or does things that are, acceptable for boys but not girls. Were there things that were acceptable for boys and not girls? What kind of climate did you grow up in? What kind of food did you eat? What about family structure? Was there a mom and a dad? Were there grandparents involved? Who was involved in taking care of you? And then the second one is customs of the child care and child rearing. So where did you sleep? In my case, I have a twin sister and an older sister, and the three of us shared a bedroom. And I slept with my twin sister, and my older sister slept apart. It was unacceptable in our house. We weren't allowed to sleep with our parents. Well, probably because it was a single father at the time, and, three little girls and single dad. I guess you don't really consider sleeping with your kids as a good practice. And again, that's how kind of an outside thing that changed. Perhaps it would have been different if our mom had not passed away when I was 6 months old. Was there a schedule for eating in your house or how you grew up? In some cultures, there's no set time, or in some there's 6 times. Like in some Asian cultures, there's 6 different times that you might eat. In the traditional American culture, we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so during those meals, does your family sit together? Does everybody cook for themselves? Is there a meal that's cooked for you? Who cooks it? Do you say grace before? Do you, what are the practices, the customs that you grew up with? And then psychology of the caretaker. Oops, sorry about that. That's what type of parenting. Did you grow up in a very strict household? Was it authoritarian, authoritative, permissive? What were your parents' cultural beliefs? What were the developmental expectations that they had for you? So when you think about children who grow up in the same home, I want you to think, can it be possible that they have completely different developmental experiences? And what is it that makes those experiences so different? You may see this in your friends, you may see it in your own family, but think about what makes it so different. And really what makes it different is inconsistency. If you're the first child, you may have a very different experience because maybe your parents are more nervous or they're doing things differently. There might be a different level of excitement. Whereas when you're the second or the third child, I know my parents were exhausted when they had twins on top of having a 2.5-year-old, right? So, you go into survival mode sometimes as a parent. But so that inconsistency, and that's just circumstances that have an effect. So many factors. So if you think, I gave you one example, can you think of others as you think of what would be an inconsistency that would create a different developmental experience in a family? So some things to think about: external influences, like perhaps someone loses their job and that really changes how your family has to budget or do meals, or maybe now both parents have to work, whereas before only one did. Perhaps there was a death in the family. Perhaps it was a caretaker of yours, maybe a grandparent, something like that. Maybe there was a divorce. So those are the things that can really have an impact on how a developmental experience will occur for a child. There could be limited resources. So the economy crashed in the United States in 2007. A lot of people lost their homes, they lost their jobs. That really had an impact on the development of children at that time. A lot of families were in survival mode. So that's going to impact what your experience is like. There could be a shortage, for example, food shortage. In other countries, there's famines that you'll learn about and things like that. In World War II in our country, there were shortages of lots of things, so they would ration food. My dad grew up in the Depression when there was a real shortage of money, jobs, everything. And so how my dad developed was very much, he was a product of his environment where he saved everything, every single thing, because he never knew when he might need it. And he was not wasteful at all because he went without for so many years. So historical changes, social media has really changed how we communicate with one another, and the internet has really changed things as well. It's changed how we get our information, who we communicate with, how we communicate, what we do with our time. Some people get lost in Facebook, or they get lost in, Snapchat, or whatever it is that you might do. So those things really have an impact on development. Consider how an individual's bioecological model and their developmental niche overlap. So, for example, when you think of historical changes, that's part of your chronos system. That's the changes over time. Or external influences like a job loss, that would be part of the exosystem. So, there's different influences. The economy, and the country and the views, that's again the macro system, how it really impacts, the attitudes and practices of the time, which will impact how a child develops. So the other universal thing is we all learn. So there's formal education, which is more Western view, but that's where it's school and books and a set curriculum. And it's apart from everyday life. You go to a building, you receive instruction. And it's not just Western. I mean, there's other cultures too, but more, what's the right word? Developed countries. There we go. So it's more, you'll see formal education occurring in more developed countries. In less developed countries, you'll see more informal education, and that's out of necessity. So children learn by observing or doing. They'll imitate. It's often provided by family members. They may be helping in daily activities. They may be helping with cleaning. They may be doing the hunting. So they're going to get their education. They will learn. It just looks different than perhaps the traditional education we would see in an industrialized country. We all go through puberty. So think about in your culture, when you had the onset of puberty cultures, there's rituals or rites of passage that are very common for kids who are going through adolescence or puberty. So ceremonies, your book talks about some ceremonies that take place in different cultures. In our culture in America, it could be having the talk, like I said. So what was it like for you? And how did it impact how you were treated by your family? Did you have more responsibilities? What did that mark anything significant for you? So women, and men, we get to be adults, right? And so along with adulthood comes the idea of childbearing years. What's expected in your culture or cultures across the world? Is marriage expected? Children? Career? Are women allowed to have a career in addition to men, or is there a different expectation? What does it look like? What about family responsibilities? Who has? And again, how is this viewed across cultures, right? It can be that the woman goes crazy. There's a lot of hormonal changes that happen. The woman may change and they cross over to being an elder now, where they're wise and they're revered. So it really, again, depends on your developmental niche. What I want you to take away from this is that your developmental niche does not just impact you as a baby, as a child growing up. It impacts us throughout our entire lifespan, up until we're elders, really up until death. So in your culture, how are elders perceived? Are they revered? Are they a burden? What role do they play within your family or within the community? Who cares for them, or are they still caring for others? So what does that look like? Again, depends on your developmental niche.